Welcome to Out in the Open. I'm Matt.
And I'm Bevan.
We're married. Woohoo! This is a podcast where we dive deep, encourage free thinking, and explore the human experience with open minds and open hearts. Here we amplify voices and shed light on topics from all walks of life, sparking honest, open-minded, and sometimes challenging conversations. Whether it's serious, silly, or simply curious, we're here to learn, laugh, and ponder all things human. So join us as we bring the unseen to the surface right here on Out in the Open. Now, many of us have had or still do have religion or faith in our lives. If you're spiritual, an atheist, if you've had religion in your life and have walked away from it but still have questions, this will be a good listen for you. On this episode, we're chatting with Brian Recker. Brian is an ex-evangelical pastor, a writer, a coach, a speaker, and a dad. We're going to be discussing faith, relationships, shame, fear, and deconstructing religion today. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Woo-hoo.
Hey, it's awesome to be here, man. Bevan, it's good to meet you guys virtually. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're more than welcome, mate. We've been very excited to have a chat with you. And as we said, we've been following along on Instagram, watching your story, watching lots of your content. So it's really nice to have you on the potty. It's really good.
Yes, as a fellow ex-pastor.
Yeah, ex-pastor. Yes, fellow ex-pastor. I wore the singlet top as we said before. We just thought we'd go in character with you, mate.
Last day of summer, sun's out, guns out.
Last day of summer. We're in spring now, so we're okay.
Okay.
Yes.
I can do that. But yeah, I think to start off, mate, we really love to really talk about your story and where this really sort of began for you. I've been reading along with you with your great content that you put online. I think a really nice place to start for us to sort of say, what was happening with you as you're an evangelical pastor? What were some of the struggles you were sort of facing back then? And some of the catalysts, I think the catalysts that really started you looking at going, well, maybe this wasn't really where I needed to be, and what was really challenging for that. And then again, how you now identify spiritually. Big question.
Yeah. So my journey of growth and evolution started even before evangelicalism because I was raised in fundamentalism. I was raised evangelicalism, according to my dad, still to this day, he would say like evangelicals are like kind of liberal and wishy-washy actually compared to what he would. My dad is an independent fundamental Baptist pastor. And so I actually followed his footsteps and went to Bob Jones University, which is a fundamentalist university. And so the difference between fundamentalism and evangelicalism is kind of subtle because they both embrace fundamentalist Christian beliefs. They both believe that sinners are going to hell, and that unless they get saved, and that Jesus, all the fundamentalist orthodox beliefs, they would both hold. The real difference is cultural engagement. Fundamentalists would see evangelicals as, for instance, fundamentalists don't have like rock and roll music in the church and stuff like that. The pastors are still in suits. They still use the King James Bible. It's a lot of these cultural earmarkers that are kind of retrograde in fundamentalism. And so for me, I began to deconstruct fundamentalism in college, and actually became an evangelical after college. And that was my first step of deconstruction, was actually becoming an evangelical. Because I had to disappoint people to do that. My dad saw that as like, a step in the wrong direction. And so I kind of had that moment of like, I'm having to do what feels right to me and disappoint people moment, even before leaving evangelicalism. So it was kind of a familiar feeling when I did it again, sometime later. Yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, I think what I look back on my story of evolution, like growing up in fundamentalism, realizing this was uncomfortable, like why are we like this? And knowing that it didn't feel right and kind of stepping out of that, but still feeling like I needed to stay within Christian orthodoxy and really also as close as possible to where my dad was still at. And I became an evangelical, and I loved their emphasis was better. Like in the fundamentalist church, it's all about what you have to do. You got to do this, you got to do that. Girls have to dress modest, et cetera, et cetera. It's all these rules. And in evangelicalism, they talk a lot more about grace. It's not just rules. They talk a lot about how, it's not about what we do. It's about what Jesus has already done. And so the message is a little different. It's a nicer message in some ways, but it's really only different in terms of emphasis, because at the end of the day, the bottom line, the exclusivity of if you're not a Christian, if you don't believe like us, you go to hell, that was still there in evangelicalism. And there was a part of me that was never comfortable with that. Hell was the doctrine that really bothered me the most.
Yeah.
even when I became a pastor, I didn't really talk about hell at all because it's actually very easy to avoid. It doesn't actually
It's
come
like,
up in the
look over
Bible. And when
there.
it does come up, yeah, I mean, I don't believe in hell for a reason. I think the Bible doesn't actually even teach hell. So when I was a pastor, I was never preaching about it, but I felt guilty about that. I felt like, I know that some people would view that as like dodging the hard truths of scripture. And of course, I wasn't really one of those heavy-handed, like constantly doing altar calls. And as a result, people weren't getting saved a bunch under my preaching, right? I was mostly challenging people to put the practices of Jesus into action. And I cared about how people were living, how we were loving, how we were treating each other. Are we dehumanizing people? Are we being inclusive? Like I wanted to see those values. But even while like I was preaching that and I felt that in my heart, my undergirding theology was still at odds with that. So I was living with some cognitive dissonance, actually, I would say, for some years. Um, I began to deconstruct hell further and really was doing that while I was a pastor simultaneously to the rise of Donald Trump in 2016. I would say was the next major pillar of my deconstruction. And I don't know how this hit you guys over there, but for me it was a rude awakening to the true state of evangelicalism. I had my blinders on. I think I had my head in the sand and I thought I thought we were good people. I thought we were the good guys. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump made me realize, oh, we're like, as a whole, as a movement in my country, we're doing more harm than good, because over 80% voted for Donald Trump. And so I all of a sudden had to look at those things more closely. I'm almost thankful for Donald Trump in some ways because it woke me up to something I was just sleeping on. I wasn't political. I wasn't politically engaged. And Donald Trump made me realize that was a major oversight. And I was just assuming. So it was almost nice that the conservatives like made the evil really explicit, as opposed to like putting a charming Mitt Romney face on the evil.
Yeah.
Like the evil of conservatism and that way of thinking really came to light. And the way that evangelicalism is really captured by a Christian nationalist way of thinking that America is a Christian nation and that they want to kind of use force to enforce their will, which is really about a lot of conservative norms that are not necessarily the things that Jesus really cared about all that much, right? It has more to do with their culture and changing demographics and stuff like that. And so a lot of that stuff made me like just realize, oh my God, like this has been about power. Like this whole movement is pretty bankrupt. And that was when I realized too that a lot of people in my church were like super excited about Trump. I began to feel more like I was on the outside of something. And for a little while, I found a lot of purpose in the fact that as a pastor within evangelicalism who maybe saw some of those problems, I could affect change. I could call people to something different. They might hear me in a way that they wouldn't hear somebody else. They're listening to Fox News every night and getting Tucker Carlson, just like shaping their imaginations. And I had the opportunity on Sundays to maybe shape their imaginations with something different, something more beautiful, something that leads us to humanity, something that looks like Jesus. And so I found value in that. And it really, I think I was, though, I wasn't being honest with myself about how much of myself how much I was having to censor myself, not only from what I could say, but how I could continue to evolve and what I could think. There were things that I was not allowing myself to think because the major issue really for me that I was resisting was queer affirmation, because that was really the line within evangelicalism where once you decide it's not a sin to be gay and God loves everybody the same regardless of sexual orientation, once you decide that, you can't be in evangelicalism more. It doesn't matter what you believe about Jesus. No. It doesn't matter if you don't change on anything in the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or any of the Orthodox formulations. All that stuff can say the exact same, but if you approve of gay people, you're not an evangelical anymore. That's a line in the sand issue for them.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
And so as a result of that, even though it wasn't a conscious thought, like, well, I can't change my mind on that because there's a lot of social pressure, like it unconsciously does bias you when you approach those issues. And so it really wasn't until I decided I needed to get out that I gave myself permission to like actually be honest about how I really felt about that it's like, well, I've never felt like that was wrong. And then I realized too, like how good the scholarship actually is. I don't think evangelical pastors are honest enough about how much the institutional pressure is on them to continue to believe what they believe. And when we approach our biblical interpretations, we all have biases, and I don't think they're honest enough about how those pressures do bias those interpretations. So once I kind of was thinking I was going to be out from under that, I began to all of a sudden see things very rapidly in a different way. Almost embarrassing that like it's like, wow, I was really like blinding myself in some ways. Um, but I'm also proud of myself for taking the steps needed to like make those moves, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
So yeah,
you've
I
got to
don't know.
be.
I just said a lot.
No, that's fantastic. You've got to be really kind to yourself. I had a lot of guilt about a lot of the things that I'd said and done to people when I'd left, because I looked back on, especially my family and what I'd said to them and about their lives and how they were living. And then I just had all this, awakening, obviously moving away and going, oh, I'm really sorry. And I really did give him a hard line. And I think what you said is, so true, is that when you don't toe that line, and I left a marriage and struggling with my sexuality, when I didn't toe the line, I saw, it was like that pimple burst and you saw the truth. People just, and all of a sudden that condemnation came so quick and so fast. When I didn't toe the line and when I moved away from it, the love just disappeared. And that was the confusing part for me. I was like, hang on, this doesn't compute. I got this feeling of love of Jesus and God in my heart, and his people are not showing me that. And like all of a sudden it was bang. It was such a
that's
hit.
interesting. You were surprised. No, I wasn't surprised at all. I knew exactly what was coming.
At least you could duck.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe I was emotionally like prepared. Like, so when I moved away from the church, first of all, I did a couple things that were smart. I moved physically. I knew I was in a small town. I was a small town pastor, and I knew that once I left the church, I didn't want to be the ex-pastor in that town. I didn't want to run into these people at the grocery store, because I knew that I had been censoring myself for a long time from change and from being vocal about even things I had already believed. At this time, but by the time I quit being a pastor, I had like a secret Twitter account for several years where I could be a socialist online, because I couldn't be a socialist in real life. I had to have an alt, like that's like you have to like bifurcate yourself, because it's like, oh, I would get fired if they knew my real politics, right? And so I was so excited to like be myself. So I moved. I didn't want any of that pressure as a limiting factor in like being able to live that out. And so living in a new city, I think, was a helpful way to really fully just be honest about some of the changes I was making and actually make those changes. Having a lot of queer friends right off the bat was really great. In fact, what ultimately happened to me being a very like more outspoken ally, that was not immediate the moment I stepped down. It took about a year, and it happened because I met some friends that became very close friends that are married guys, and that ultimately I had to get to the point, and I had conversations with them about this because they knew that I had evolved on this, but that I hadn't spoken about it publicly. And I talked to them. I was like, I know I need to speak about this publicly, but I am really scared because I know what's going to happen. I know what the backlash is going to be. I know how all those people from my past are going to talk about me. And they were like, man, you'll get there, but like you have to get there when you're ready to get there. And so like they didn't put any pressure on me to speak out. They were like, we know your heart, you know? But ultimately, I got to the place where I cared more about what they thought about me than about what my old church folk would think about me. It was like, I want my gay friends to be proud of me more than I want my old church friends to think well of me. And so if they write me off, but they're like honored by that, then that was like worth it for me. And so I think that it is important, the voices that you're listening to, because if you don't detach a little bit, then it's really hard not to just cater to people's emotions. And that's why I think there's not a lot of vocal allyship, because most of us do still have close relationships with people who don't want us to be allies and who our relationship might suffer for vocal allyship. And so, I do think that there's a way to be a vocal ally and tell those people like, listen, this isn't an indictment of you. This is where I'm at. And if they choose to be offended by that and walk away from the relationship, that's on them. But yeah, when I started speaking up about it online, immediately my old church took like my sermons down from their website, and they sent out like a church-wide email about me that like, pray for Brian because like he's falsehoods and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
But when it happened, I was emotionally prepared for that. And I was able to even, call my buddies and tell them that happened and laugh about it with them. And, these are people again who my friend, the one of the married dads, he also had a story leaving the church, and he lost a lot more than I did. Like that was harder for him. He went to conversion therapy, like he has so I have like any of the pains of rejection that I might be experiencing. like my queer brothers and sisters that left the church over this or that got kicked out of the church, that pain was like far worse. And so I'm not complaining.
That pressure, I tried, I did an initial session about conversion therapy as well. And it's that, I'm so far beyond it now, which I'm so thankful for, but those feelings of shame and disgust in yourself and just wanting so badly to be anything but who you truly are, all those feelings, they're so gross. And I can't imagine being stuck in them and the pressure of being in a community like that as a gay person. I was thankful at the time that I had enough support around me to hold my courage and come out of the closet. But, some people are there for a lot longer. Yeah.
And look, and we really appreciate, and from listening to you, Brian, we really appreciate who you are and being an ally to us. It resonates and it means a lot. It really does. Anyone that can hear that and knowing that we have that support and that people can come to those conclusions themselves when they see our heart, when they see that we're just human, and we go beyond that means everything to us. It really does. It really, really does. So we thank you so much for being a voice also for us. We do.
Thanks, man.
It brings us such joy and such courage to listen to it.
Yeah.
I think that sort of leads us to that question of like pulling that apart for a lot of people is very difficult, and understanding, especially when you have, this love in your heart for Jesus, and then you're told, it's often a leave the church and leave that behind, and many have just sort of left that in tatters. It's really interesting to listen to you and talking about scripture and how we can pull that apart and what scripture really may be saying and is saying really about sexuality. I think it's really nice to be able to just sort of talk about that and about how you've looked at that from a sexuality point of view and from homosexuality, because I think it's important again to revisit that and what you've actually been saying scripture is really saying about that.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on these things. I don't have like a degree in biblical scholarship. My master's is in ministry, and so I did some biblical scholarship. But what's interesting is, the scholarship is out there, but evangelicals shelter themselves from it. Mark Knoll, a historian, he talks about the scandal of the evangelical mind. The reality is there's a lot of scholarship that evangelicals are just like putting blinders on over because it's at odds with their view of the Bible. They want to have an inerrant Bible that just speaks with one consistent voice and doesn't have any internal contradictions. And that's just not what the Bible is. And so they really only even listen to scholarship that confirms that preconceived bias. But outside of that, the Bible says a lot of things about sex, and most of the condemnations about homosexuality are in the Old Testament, alongside all kinds of things that are ridiculous, from not wearing mixed fabrics in your garments to trimming the corners of your beard, things that Christians don't abide by at all, but they point to those commandments and say, well, those abide for some particular reason, but they don't have a particular logical, coherent frame on that. In the New Testament, most of the passages, especially 1 Corinthians 6, that's like the one that gets brought up a lot, which, famously 1946 was the first year that the word homosexuality was actually in the Bible. It's actually two Greek words that get translated just as homosexuality. It's malakoi and arsenokoitai. And those words do not refer to homosexuality because homosexuality did not exist at that time. They had no concept of sexual orientation. Those words are likely referring to the two sides of a pederastic relationship, to an abusive older person and maybe the young male prostitute in this relationship. And so that's the kind of relationship that's being condemned in that passage, most likely, according to many scholars. And the reality is, I think for me, rather than even debating like all the minutia of those verses, I don't need, maybe this sounds bad. I don't need the Bible to tell me that it's okay to love gay people.
No. That's
I don't need the Bible to approve of your lifestyle for you to embrace that. And I say, sorry, not even lifestyle. I don't need the Bible to approve of your identity for your identity to be valid. Your identity is valid. Whatever the Bible says, I actually do believe, because the Bible, we don't look to the Bible to make rules for people that contradict human flourishing. The Bible serves people, not people the Bible. We don't exist to serve the rules of the Bible. And that's what Jesus said. when Jesus' disciples broke the Sabbath command, and the religious elites called them out for it. They were plucking grain on the Sabbath. And Jesus famously replied and said, "Is man made for the Sabbath, or is the Sabbath made for man?" And if you know anything about the Sabbath, it was like it's the law that has the most words in the Ten Commandments, the most real estate spent on it. And they had all kinds of regulations for it. It was a very important law for them. And Jesus is saying that that serves people, not the other way around. And it's just easy to get that mixed up. But the whole point of the Bible, to say that the law is for people, is really to say that the whole point of the Bible, the whole point of religion, is for what is good for people and human flourishing. And so we don't only need the Bible to tell us that. That's where we can also look to other experts in the field of science and mental health. And so if, the social data is saying that, hey, these condemning attitudes towards queer people is causing rising suicide rates and depression in young gay men, et cetera, we can look at that and we can say that is actually enough reason for me, based on the principles that Jesus taught me, to say that we should love and affirm and accept queer people if it's better for people. Because the law, that's the tail wagging the dog. The whole point is love. That's the point of religion. And the Bible is not our only way to get there. The Bible can point us there, but it can, when it becomes a stumbling block and it actually stops us from loving the person that's right in front of us, the Bible has become an idol. The Bible is not God.
Yeah.
God is in you.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point that you just said. The Bible is becoming an idol. Gosh, because I've seen and experienced in my life. I've come from a religious upbringing of I guess worldwide Church of God, I guess maybe you could say like closest thing to Seventh-day Adventist kind of Old Testament teachings and
still keeping the Sabbath and
the Saturday, the Sabbath. What would you say to someone that's still so rules-based in their faith?
I guess it depends where they were at. I have a very hard time believing that you can change anybody's mind that doesn't like have an emotional desire to change their mind.
Sure.
So I think I would actually start with where their heart was, and if I got the sense that they were a compassionate, open-hearted, like person of good faith, then I might challenge them in some ways about, for instance, I might cause them to or want them to think about the fact that the Bible itself doesn't claim those things about itself. And so that's a presupposition that's being imposed on it. And so when you're doing that, you're actually, if you love the Bible, you should love it for what it is and not for what you just want it to be. Like, let's love it for what it actually is. And so if we have every reason to believe that there actually are contradictions in the Bible, then it is actually most loving not to take two passages. Like, for instance, I think the easiest one to talk about, James says that, basically that you get saved through works, not only faith. And Paul says we're saved by grace through faith, not of works. They literally say the exact opposite thing. So what you can do, you have two options. You can either say, well, the Bible is inerrant and without contradiction and only speaks in one consistent voice. So that means those two things that sound like they're saying opposite things, we have to flatten them out, squish them together and make them say the same thing. We have to figure out how they actually agree. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say, hey, maybe there's two perspectives here and they're in conversation. Most scholars now believe that James was aware of Paul's writings and was responding to him. He's in dialogue with him. Right? You miss that completely if you have to flatten it out and squish it together. Which one is showing the Bible more respect? Understanding both of those views and the contrary positions that they were expressing and trying to understand how they might interrelate, or flattening them out, squishing it together for the sake of inerrancy?
Yeah.
I think the first one. So
No, it's good. We'll go with number one.
What it actually is. And then, is it possible that God can still speak to us through the imperfect? I'm not saying God doesn't speak through the Bible. I'm saying God is so much better. God doesn't need a perfect, tight argue. Like the Bible's messy as fuck. Like if you do that with the Bible, you're making it into something that it's not, as opposed to seeing, oh, there's all kinds of stuff in the Bible that I disagree with, I wouldn't approve of, but you see people on a journey, you see mistakes being made. It's joining in a conversation that we get to continue, but it's about God. It's not the Bible at the center. And I believe that God can speak to us through something messy and imperfect as people, and God still does that.
And to add to the messiness of the Bible, it was written over such a long period of time, and it's been translated how many times from different languages, exactly what you talked about with the passage about homosexual, and that word didn't exist until the 40s, and it just meant something completely different when it was written, and we make it mean something now which it didn't mean when it was written. So it's so messy.
My one of my favorite things I used to say as a pastor was, if God can use a donkey, he can use me to bring Jesus in. And I was always the donkey, and I still feel like I'm proud to be the donkey. It's like, I'm messy, my life's all over the place, but I'm still a vessel that's open. And I think that's really important. I've always wanted to remain open. And what you said before is, when you talk to people, you've got to realize, are they open? Is their heart open? Where is their heart? And that's so true. Where are they right now? If they're closed off, there's no point. I see you when you do your comments on Instagram of people who are really going at you all the time. I just love it. And when you sort of say, should I just keep going or not? I think recently you had someone who said, yeah, I know. And it's a struggle. It's like, do you keep going with the dialogue with these people, or is it because they're just closed and there's no point? Yeah, it's a difficult thing. Yeah.
And I think I've had to let that go. I have a lot of people in my life who I would love it if they believed different things about a lot of things. I've had to just kind of say, even to myself, like, can I accept those people where they're at, knowing that they'll never be where I want them to be? And then I have to make a decision. Well, can I stay in relationship with them or not? And that you can't make that decision for anybody else. I'm not telling anybody what to do with their parents who maybe don't approve of them and that sort of thing. And that decision might even ebb and flow over the years. You might feel in a place where you can engage at sometimes, and sometimes you have to disengage. But for me, I've let go of my need to control or change what people believe. I feel, though, like I know what I think about these things, and I want to be authentic to that. And people can receive me or not.
Yeah, and we were talking about this yesterday. I was saying to Matt, it's more about me asking my question, why do I need that from them? Yeah. More so asking myself that question, what is it that I need? It's not so much trying to make people believe what I believe. It's doing that. And the older I've got, I have parents in their 80s now, and they're beautiful. Wow. They're amazing. They're still with us. And I used to struggle, having for them to understand my journey and who I am now. And then letting that go has been beautiful and amazing, just to love them where they're at regardless, and appreciate them, because you just spend so much time and waste time with people. Time is precious.
Trying to argue the point.
Time is precious. And, again, I think if, we say what Jesus would be doing and the example, I just want to love them where they're at.
Well, who do we think Jesus really was then?
It's true. It's a great question. How's that evolved for you? Like, about how you feel about the big J3?
Yeah. So I have some agnosticism about it, if I'm honest, in terms of the specifics. Yeah. I still, if I'm in a church that let's say they're going to recite a creed, I'm happy to recite the creed in faith. But there are some wickets in the creed where I'm just like, I don't know exactly what I believe about that. Like, maybe that's just a metaphor for me, and I don't know. I do believe that Jesus was God. I do believe that God is in you and I and everything. And so I believe Jesus fully actualized that. And so was Jesus in a unique way? To me, there's some mystery around that, like the incarnation. I do love the way that, for instance, Richard Rohr talks about the incarnation in all of creation, and that actually all of life and reality is charged with the grandeur of God. I do believe that for Christians, though, we can say definitively that Jesus shows us what God is like and has always been like. And so whether that was as a person, a man just like you and me, but really living into the reality of his divinity and connection with God, or whether that was as some special incarnation, I don't know that I think the Bible, the Gospels themselves don't spell it out for a reason. And I think that there is this love affair with certitude. We want to nail everything down. There are no creeds in the Bible. Like, those things are left quite open and mysterious. Jesus does not call himself explicitly God ever. There's these mysterious things that are said around it that nudge us in those directions. But then Christian history felt the need to sort of nail it out, and then also kill everybody who disagreed with the way that they nailed it out, which, if you ask me, if you want to maintain a posture of curiosity and learning, murdering everybody that disagrees with your formulation is not the way to go about that. So there was no ability to hold mystery. Instead, we had to nail it down with certitude. And so I think that fucked us up a little bit. But that being said, I still feel comfortable in spaces that would say those orthodox things around Jesus, and I'm just able to kind of say I believe that. I just don't know exactly what that means, and I don't feel the need to dial that down. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I love you saying that you believe that Jesus was God, because like I think where I'm at in my kind of spiritual faith journey is that I just believe that love is God, literally just love. And I guess Jesus just showed us that, right? He just showed us that that was all we needed, was love and honesty and integrity and truth in self, and literally just love, because we just don't need anything else. All the things that are piled on top constantly, and I'm way more ignorant in my language around this than you two, because you guys have so much more history in that.
No,
But
I think
I
the
don't know if
truth
I
is so
do.
simple, man. I think you're on it. Like, I think we overcomplicate these things, and it is really that simple in some way.
I was going to say, going to uni or college sometimes complicates it. You know, the most beautiful faith I've ever seen is from people often who have had no background in that, who have a lived experience, and that oozes from them, and you just realize that. And what I was going to say when you said that before was that when I did leave, it's interesting that you said people wanted an absolute from me of what I believed now, and it's interesting that everyone's just like, so what do you believe now? Do you still believe in God? Do you believe in hell?
Here's why that question's not even helpful, because what I believe now
No.
doesn't tell you what I believe tomorrow.
I know.
We get to change as often as we want.
yeah, that's right.
And it's so evolving and freeing to do so. And I used to be really uncomfortable with that. I'm like, geez, I really got to work out, what do I believe? And you know what? You don't. I don't have to believe that.
You know what you do? You do if God is a punisher.
Yes.
If God is going to punish you for not believing the right thing, then you better fucking know what you believe.
Yeah, because my ass is going to be on fire.
Once you recognize the whole thing's not about that, right? That's for so many of us, we were raised to believe that religion and spirituality, Christian spirituality, what's the purpose of it? It's avoiding punishment when you die. Therefore, the purpose now is to make sure your beliefs are right so that you don't get punished when you die. It's a total wrong paradigm. That's not what religion is about. That's not what spirituality is about. Not only that, that takes you away from the true reality of what spirituality is. It actually corrupts the whole thing. Once you let go of that, you realize, okay, that's such a small thing for spirituality to be about. This is about learning what is it to be a loving person in this world with this one and only life that I have. That's what spirituality is about. And that's what the way of Jesus, I believe, is about. Not about how to avoid the punishing God when you die.
Yeah. As soon as it's good. Yoo-hoo. And once I let go of hell, right, the whole construct of it, and realized it was about me living this life as I should now, it just changed everything for me, and understanding that. Often I'd have criticism, people saying, well, that's very nice that you've just sort of nicely put that aside, because now you're a sinner. You can just say, well, sin doesn't exist. That's fine for you. And you can say, no, hell doesn't exist. That makes you feel better. And I'm like, no. It's not just because it's not making me just feel better. I just realized that the truth is that construct sitting on my shoulders isn't truth. It's not my truth. And it's now I feel more free to love, period. That's it. And before, I couldn't love. I just couldn't love properly.
You couldn't love yourself first.
Well, I couldn't love me. I couldn't love everyone around me because I was too busy. I was too busy making everyone else happy.
You can't love God because God is a punisher. You only love in that paradigm. What happens if you don't love God?
Yeah.
It's love God or else, which you can't love in that paradigm. There's no love if it's love under threat of punishment. So you can't love God. You can't love yourself because you were born worthy of hell. You can't trust yourself. You can't listen to your heart. You're sinful. You're desperately wicked. Your heart is actually evil. Your heart will lead you astray. So you can't love yourself. And of course, you can't really truly love other people that are different from you because they're going to die and go to hell. You have to change them. You have to save them. You have to colonize them. You can't really love them. To love them where they're at would be to allow them to go into that fate of torment, which is not to love them at all. To really love them, you have to do unloving things to them to save them from hell. Like, for instance, if you're a parent of a queer kid, tell them, I have to cut you off because you have to know how serious this is because I don't want you to die and go to hell. They can tell themselves that that's love under that paradigm of hell. So really at every level, it really does make true love impossible.
The amount of times I had $1 for every time someone said that, I'm doing this because I love you.
Yeah.
The
The amount of queer people that face that as well from their parents under the guise of love, it's so sad. And that's why we've found such a community and a family, and we bind together. I mean, how did queer people come into your life, and how did you become such the fierce ally that you are for queer people?
I guess God was kind to me. God led me into it.
Yeah.
He let you in
I
on the
probably,
secret, hey? Ta-da!
I think I've always been a bit of an outsider. I think I've always fit in better with the misfits in some way. I was homeschooled growing up, and I always felt like a weirdo. And so I've always kind of been on the margins in some way in my outlook on things. And so I don't know. I guess I've never fully felt super comfortable in heteronormative culture, despite being heterosexual. And so honestly, at this point, like I prefer hanging out with queer people. They're more fun. They're more interesting. They're more in touch with themselves. So most of my friends are queer. But yeah, I don't know. So when I connected with the dads I was telling about, who were probably my first close gay friends upon quitting pastoring, they were just dads at my school, and we met at school pickup. It was just a camaraderie, we just clicked and we were buddies. Just kind of saw a mutuality, and we started hanging out. And they actually, after my separation, I went on like a family vacation with them with my boys. They like brought us along on their family vacation.
I love that.
I was kind of reeling in the wake of that. So,
Mm.
they've become family. But, yeah, other friends as well, just through the years. And I don't know. I mean, psychologically, like I asked myself, yeah, part of it is probably feels like I do feel sad about the years that I did hold a position that was harmful to that community. And so certainly like I have worked hard at just feeling a sense of, yeah, I want to not just undo harm that I've done, but also be a part of change. Like that gives me purpose on the other side of it. When I ask like, what was that for? Well, I think it gives me purpose for this next thing. And so it kind of just becomes fuel in that way.
Beautiful.
That's how God redeems things too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the redemption in our lives. And when you see that, you just realize it gives you so much hope for people that, there is so much redemption and life can really change. We have a saying I always say to Matt, it's all right. Life can change on a dime. It can turn so quickly and so beautifully. And also the other way. But we have yeah, I've experienced definitely both of those. But that gives me knowing that this life is dynamic. We're not stuck. And that gives me always hope for that. I was saying to Matt, one of my favorite Instagram stories for you was about the non-binary. I love when we listen to someone's comments about it, and then you obviously come back in on your comments. One of my other favorites is when you talk about the cookie, and that's really fun too.
What about that?
I love them.
Well, we need to explore that if you've brought it up. You need to tell us about both of these things.
We need to talk about the non-binary, and I think it's really great for the people who are listening to explore that too. I think if I put it into context, Brian, it was someone was talking about if you're not a son or a daughter of God, then you cannot inherit the kingdom of God.
So you literally need to be a son or a daughter. You can't be something in the middle.
Yeah.
Weird. I mean, honestly, it's a weird argument, but what I'm recognizing right now is that community, the trans community and the non-binary community are under particular attack. And it's really just conservative Christians looking for another scapegoat to rally their base. They're like, this is a vulnerable target. It's only like 1% of the population. We can gang up on them and bully them in order to rally our base. And so they'll just make shit up in the Bible to like just be mean to them, because the Bible doesn't say anything about non-binary people or trans people. And so they're just literally pulling stuff. And of course, yeah, the Bible talks about, uses the metaphor of being a son of God or a daughter of God. And so this joker was basically saying, yeah, if you're a non-binary, then you're not a son or a daughter. So you're not a part of the family of God, which is an insane way to take that away, right? The point actually of the metaphor, when Paul talks about the son, talks about us all being sons of God, in the context of that day and age, he was talking about the fact that we're all sons, and therefore we all have an inheritance. And so he's actually really saying that whether you're a man or a woman or non-binary or even a slave or free, whoever you are, we're all sons of God in the sense that we all share in an equal inheritance. God belongs to everybody. Nobody can gatekeep God. Everybody's invited to the banquet table. It's a family feast for everybody, sons, daughters, and everybody in between. So like literally it's taking the exact opposite of what was intended, I think, by this inclusive gospel message and using that very message of inclusion to exclude people, specifically the people on the margins, some of the most marginalized people. Society has always been against trans people and non-binary people simply because they don't fit into heteronormative culture. And so to focus on those people, and it's like the ultimate form of punching down. It's bullying, and it makes me really mad, and it makes me really sad that Christians of all people do that kind of bullying and punching down on marginalized communities when Jesus's whole fucking thing was going to the poor, the outcasts, the imprisoned, and speaking hope and truth to specifically the poor in spirit, the ones on the most bottom side of history. He went to the people on the underside, and those are the people that get punched down on the most by Christians. And ultimately, it's a grasp for power. It's a way to just they see the demographics in the country changing. They see the nuns, the rise of the nuns. They see people slipping out of their pews, and they're like, how can we keep people mad? How can we keep people afraid? Oh, there's a little group that we can bully.
Yeah.
This is like you were talking about.
No, it pisses us off.
And it's like Trump at the moment too, appealing to these people. He does spew just hate, division, and causes so much chaos when that none of what Trump says was what Jesus would have been about. None of it. And it's so sad to see. What do you think why do they gravitate to people like Trump then that spew such hate?
Well, I don't think it's their Christianity that does it. I think that in that sense, their Christianity is actually a part of a broader sense of just being for them, it's a culture, it's a nationality. That's why you talk about Christian nationalism. It is just an identity that is tied to whiteness and white supremacy. And just holding on to that cultural ideal, it really doesn't have a lot to do with the way of Jesus following, this preacher from Nazareth from the first century. It doesn't have a lot to do with that. It has a lot more to do with being raised as a white person in America and holding on to a particular cultural ideal, I think. And then Christianity is just lumped in with that because that's the dominant religion. That's the religion that they were raised in. And so religion has always been used as a tool of the ego. Anything can be used to establish, we take these things, we grasp onto them, these aspects of our identity, and we say that's the thing, and we use it to feel superior and separate to people. And you can do that with all kinds of things, and religion is one of the most effective things to do that with. So it gets used for that a lot, unfortunately, but I think that's kind of the opposite of what Jesus was trying to do with spirituality.
Yeah. And there was what you've been saying recently, and I've been sort of waging in on it, is about the equality of not having funded welfare for people who need welfare, and that's been really interesting to watch that conversation over the last few days. I think people in Australia, we do take this for granted very much, that we do have funded welfare. That I didn't really understand it, about America has this tax system as you get a tax credit. And I love the fact that, it's really hiding behind this tax credit. Like we can't say we're giving money to someone, right? But if you give it as a tax credit, it's easier. And that really blew my mind. I mean, I can remember what it was like when I was there in the 90s, and I was shocked of how much that the government didn't look after people and just left them. I was sort of saying to Matt, there was like young men in their 20s that had been abandoned by their families who were living in squalor in homes and just forgotten by society. It was really shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would think the Christians would obviously be bothered by that. And in general, though, I'm sure you've maybe heard the expression like the Protestant work ethic. Like there's really a big thing within American Christianity of earning and especially like people earning their keep, which is interesting because that is quite antithetical to the gospel message. The gospel is all about grace. It's for a free gift. That kind of is the whole thing, is that God is not something that you can work for or earn. God is all of us, all of our inheritance. God is easily accessible. It's free. You've always had God. I think that that's been an important shift for me, even about the meaning of grace is not like, even we turned grace in Protestantism into, you still had to kind of get it through like believing the right things and praying the right prayer, as opposed to recognizing the free gift of God, that we were born into God. I think we were told that we were not worthy, and we were told that we had to do things to earn God, that we had to clean ourselves up, that we had to obey religious rules, we had to become a Christian, we had to do this X, Y, Z. But that actually was the thing that grace was meant to undo and say, no, 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 it was already yours. God was already yours all along. Yeah. That to me is the beauty of grace. And when you apply that, I think socioeconomically, certainly, yeah, we belong to one another, and we are our brother's keepers, and we do care for one another, and we are connected to each other, and we do have to look out for each other. And we don't ask first, does this person deserve this? Does that homeless person deserve that? What are they going to spend that money on? Maybe we shouldn't give it to them because they don't have good spending habits, et cetera, et cetera. No, Jesus started with the need. He didn't qualify it like that. And so, yeah, I do certainly wish that Christians were more vocal for like a welfare state.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I used to get in trouble because I used to live next to the church in the church manse, and of course people would knock on my door all the time, and I just give them money all the time, and I used to get a lot of pressure saying, you need to ask what they're going to use it for, and I'm like, really?
Would you have like an allocated amount of money that you could give out from the front door?
And they're like, we really, yeah, and they'd be like, I'm going to spend it on petrol. I'm like, are they really going to spend it on petrol? I'm like, does it matter? Like, should I just I just wanted to give stuff to them, so I was just doing that anyway. I was like, I'm not going to ask them what they're spending their money on. Shouldn't we just give it to them? We had a food kitchen also, so, but yeah, it blew my mind. I was only in my early 20s when I moved to the US, and coming from Australia and seeing that, I was like, what is going on here? Like, why aren't we looking after each other?
Yeah, it's quite rare. I mean, most countries are getting on board with more of a social democratic system, having a pretty strong safety net, universal health care. In the developed world, I mean, it's getting pretty. The U.S. is now on a shorter list of countries that don't have universal health care. And yet, not only do we not have it, but even our supposedly left-wing party, the Democrat Party, it's not on their party platform. They're not even fighting for it.
Yeah.
How insane is that? That's taken for granted. In Canada, even the conservatives aren't pushing back against universal health care paid by the state, right? They're like, yeah, that's, people, it's popular. People like it. What are we going to do? In our country, even our supposed progressive party isn't even pushing for that right now. That's how far right we are as a country.
Yeah. It's how
insane. And the evangelicals are a big part of keeping us there, for sure. They do still have a lot of cultural power.
Yeah, they certainly do.
So that's one reason why I talk about that sort of thing a lot. I do.
I love it.
Because if the Christians, that's all it would take. If the Christians in America all decided everybody should have health care, we'd have it. That'd be it. We'd be good. We'd be a goner. That would be great. Yeah. So, I'm going to keep talking about that.
No. We love it. Keep talking about it because it's good from here seeing it. It's like you guys on a fishbowl, we look into it, from here and see what's going on. And there was, before you go on, this would be really heartening. I think most Australians were asked who they'd have at this point in time in the election in America, and I think 90% were not going to vote for Trump. So that's all right. Yeah, Australians get it.
Yeah, we see it all objectively. And it's
we're like crazy shit's going down.
Churches over there. I follow a few churches that are insane, dude.
Yeah, I know.
What kind of wacky churches do we have in Australia? I want to know.
We've got some wackies.
Are you serious? Look up Echo Church.
Echo?
Right. You know that one?
No.
Have you heard of it?
No.
Yeah, Echo. He just sounds like an American guy, basically. He's like all about Trump and stuff. But it's an Australian church. I follow him. Hillsong obviously started in Australia. They're not as Trumpy. They're pretty problematic, I would say, though. But yeah, look up Echo Church. That's from you guys. So we're not the only crazy ones.
Okay,
We've had a few guys over the years claim to be Jesus. I remember a guy in Queensland, and he looked like he had the beard and all the traditional.
I feel like you would look kind of like Jesus if you grew your hair out.
Yeah, he does.
But it's such a cliche.
Jesus vibe, does he not?
Yeah, he does. He has
such
a Jesus
cliche
vibe.
vision of what Jesus looked like, though. It's like the beard, and if I put on some linen robe or something,
right.
Yeah, true.
Jesus for Halloween. I think you'd kill it.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, do that. Do Jesus for Halloween.
Hey, let's shift track. I think we've got in common a book that we've read called The Ethical Slut. We read this book a couple of years ago.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. How has this, evolved your ways of thinking on sex and shame and your general views on relationships? What do you reckon?
So my sex therapist recommended me that book back a few years ago, and I found it quite enlightening. Coming out of purity culture, was just kind of beginning to wrestle with what did I think about sexuality, and I was I still just kind of reeling. You're in this period where you're trying to figure out, what am I going to hold on to here? What are the rules? Oh, there still have to be rules, don't there? As opposed to just realizing again, like, well, what serves you? What leads to flourishing? And I did love just the vision for ethics in that book that it talked about, but like really reclaiming your own sexual authority and autonomy, while also though really caring deeply about your partners, but not. The sin isn't how many partners do you have, right? It's the level of care with which you treat the people that you're with, correct, and yourself, right? And is this cultivating connection and love? And you can cultivate a beautiful connection in one night even, and it doesn't have to carry on. That doesn't hurt anybody. There's no harm there. And that was a very different way of thinking about things. And obviously, even like with multiple partners, and that book has to do with polyamory, although it's not exclusively about that. And that was something I never would have. And I don't consider myself polyamorous, but I enjoyed thinking about that and even realizing that, I don't have a problem with that. Like, that was quite revelatory for me. And knowing too that the Bible really does not have a problem with that. In fact, it's actually probably even easier to make a case for polyamory than homosexuality in the Bible.
Wow.
You have quite a few texts, especially in the Old Testament, that explicitly condemn sort of same-sex sex, whereas what you have over and over again are some of the main characters of the Bible just with many wives and never once condemned for it at all. And so, I mean, if anything, like, these people are lauded and acclaimed, and they're said to be after God's heart. So in the New Testament, you don't see a pattern of that, but it's never explicitly condemned. It certainly doesn't seem like God has something, opposed to that. It is very much a cultural thing. And I don't think it's for everybody. I'm not trying to like push polyamory certainly on anybody, because I think emotionally it can be very challenging. I think people can have a hard time navigating the jealousy. And if you are going to do that, you should probably have some people that you could talk to help you sort through all the feelings that you'd have around other partners and that sort of thing. But I do think that was a helpful, like, if you're trying to do like a big sex reset, I think coming out of purity culture, you could do worse than that book. I'd be curious what you thought.
Well, look, it's such an amazing book because it allows us to explore language that maybe we haven't been able to understand before. I mean, language is such an amazing thing, and I guess it's so amazing how powerful it is. And I guess when people in power take books and art away from us, how that impacts us, because when we have free access to information and books and knowledge, it just opened up for us new communication channels. Like it challenged us to
we're talking about this now.
But it allowed us to be able to have a conversation that we wouldn't have been able to even have beforehand, because we wouldn't have known how to have such a conversation. But now we can have really. And initially, they'd be really hard to have conversations, very, very challenging. And sometimes, they could be very emotional. But we're at a point now where we can have a hard conversation.
I cry.
Our emotions don't get in the way, and we can just have a conversation because we have the words and the ability to be able to talk about something. And when we, without those channels of communication, I guess, this is where examples of, say, people cheating on each other come in, or being completely unfaithful to your partner because people want to explore things, but they can't talk to their partner about it, and they're so full of shame and guilt. But we can talk about literally anything with each other now, and anything's on the table. Whether we do things or not, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
I do think that communication around sex is really tough within purity culture, within evangelical spaces, because a lot of times we grow up with, partners that we are not able to talk about, because any sex that we're doing or anything that we're doing that's even sexual is wrong. And so you're not going to talk about it because, like, let's say you have a boyfriend and girlfriend. This is the classic thing. Like, they're in youth group or whatever. They keep messing around. They feel bad every time. They like repent every time or whatever. But what they do when they do mess around, quote unquote, they're not like talking about, hey, what do you like? What do I like? What feel like they're not having conversations around sex because they're in sin, right? So they're like, there's lips sealed about it. They're fumblingly like experimenting, and then they just feel guilt and shame on the other end. But they're like, it, and your body sort of learns to feel negatively about sex. Especially, I mean, in church, you're often made to feel guilty, and so you start to see sexuality as actually the enemy of your spirituality.
Yes. Yes.
Your sexuality is in danger of threatening your relationship with God, as opposed to seeing it as a means of connection to yourself and other people, which is to be connected to God, I would say. And so I think sexuality can absolutely be easily integrated with spirituality. In fact, it's, I think, one of the most beautiful and profound ways that we experience connection and therefore spirituality. And yet it was really seen as the enemy of that. And so you had to sort of put it into a compartment over there. And when you were engaging in it, you weren't feeling spiritual, you were feeling shameful.
Isn't it funny that to be told that it is the enemy, and yet when you have the ability to communicate and to connect on a really deep level of love through education and knowledge, that you can access such higher levels of love and connection, and love is God. So it's crazy that we could feel so shamed and so awful about it when it is such a beautiful thing.
It is. The thing I love that you also said, Brian, about the book, it's not saying one way or the other is the right way or not. It's just talking about ethics and being truthful and good communication, whether you decide to be monogamous, whether you decide to be open or polyamorous. It is, and I love that bit because I think, the big thing for me was realizing that even in monogamy, I was, the ethics sometimes are not there. The communication, of course, is not there, which leads to major problems. And we've seen around us a lot of non-ethical monogamists and wanting them to be, wanting them to be free. And we know what they're doing in secret, and it's so painful to watch that. And I know that they believe that there's a lot, especially men who are traveling challenged with their own sexuality within a marriage, are really struggling, but, they're heading for a brick wall, when they're not being honest about where they're at. But the book for us, it's definitely been a game changer.
Yeah. The Ethical Slut. Read it, guys.
Yes.
It's really worth it. It's not going to change who you are. It's not some big scary thing. It will open your mind, allow new ways of communication with your partner, and it might spice up your sex life.
You never know. Yeah. It probably does. It definitely does.
Just even the simple idea of sex positivity, that sex is not a bad thing. Sex is a good thing.
Yeah.
And so like the idea of being a slut, like I love how just they're reclaiming that word, because that's like, why do we shame people for enjoying sex? That's the stupidest. Literally almost everybody enjoys sex, right? Like sex is enjoyable. We all know it. Just go outside and look at billboards, and like sex is we all want to have sex, obviously, but we shame people for enjoying it. That is so insane. And that just shows like the shame at the center of like society, right? And so the way that they reclaim that and say, hey, let's just be honest about the fact that all of us love this. Why don't we think about it in more positive ways and actually learn how to celebrate it within ourselves and in other people? And it's okay to want what you want, and allowing that to exist within yourself, and then communicating that without shame, and then working on that with your partner. I think it has been helpful, especially, I'm in a new relationship now, post a marriage and a divorce.
Right. We see the love. It's looking good. We're seeing the love.
We're doing great. I mean, so we're in a long distance relationship, which it has its ups and downs, certainly, not due to the person and our connection, but just due to the logistics are often frustrating. We wish we could spend more time together. But it's been cool having done a lot of that work and being in a new relationship. Being able to encounter sex without shame. We're not married, and that does not, I don't walk away feeling bad about the sex that we have, if you would have told me 10 years ago that would be the case, I would have been surprised, And so, it's cool to know. I know some people do struggle with that on the other side of deconstruction, feeling shame still, even though like maybe you change your mind intellectually. A lot of people have this where they like, okay, I know there's nothing wrong with this. I believe it's fine, but I still, every time I go out, every time I do it, anything, whatever, I just feel so bad. And I think that book was probably helpful. I think just doing a lot of inner work and kind of thinking through, Yeah, just allowing my desires to exist, and even like allowing some of those bad feelings to exist, and not like shooing them away into the corner, but allowing myself to sit with them and work through them. Yeah, I can say that I don't feel any of that anymore, and that's really nice.
Yeah,
That's so good.
And even and the book does talk a lot about that about jealousy. Like, so even when you're feeling those negatives, they're valid, and they need to be communicated and felt. I think people run away from that, and we've been a little bit polar. We've always been open from the beginning, and that was a communication that we did, and we've moved through that with therapy, and also
sex therapy was great.
Sex therapy was great.
We talk so much, and look, like most often we just explore things together with other people, which is what we really.
And it's more about, for us, often having that conversation and being free to talk about our own desires. It's not always. It's not always about acting on it. It's more about being free to talk about it and feeling that you're being heard.
Well, and I love that you're also open about the fact that you're open. I think more people do need to talk about that. I know it can be a sensitive thing because there's often a fear that you'll be judged or people will think your partnership's not valid in some way. But I think more people need to talk about it because of that. Like, I think it's actually a lot more common than people think, but most people don't feel the freedom to say that in public. They feel like people are going to judge them. But I think it's beautiful to just acknowledge, like, there's not one way to do relationships. The way that you should be in a relationship is the way that works for you. And also for that relationship, like, you might actually do an open relationship in one relationship, and another relationship later in life, you might not want to do that. And that's okay. Like, it's checking in with yourself and your partner and working through that together. That's what makes it right. That's what makes it good. Not based on some standard that's over and above your relationship that your relationship has to conform to. And I think when you're doing that, again, you're making it not about the person and the relationship and the flourishing of the individual. It's instead about conforming to some arbitrary rule,
Yeah, correct. For us, it's respect, about daily check-ins, making sure we're communicating, and it's always up for negotiation. And it's fluid in that respect, from monogamy, open.
We flow through different things.
We flow through different phases and times in our life. It's not this, we're open, monogamy. It's just this fluid conversation continually about how we are feeling, where we're going. We don't always get it right. I always fall back sometimes. I've come from a fairly traditional background. You're right. Intellectually, sometimes I'm really good, but sometimes here it's got to catch up. It takes a bit of time. And there's that fear. And unfortunately, I have sexual abuse in my background, and that I've had to work through a long time ago, but that continually, has this little voice too. So it's important to have that communication and open communication and trust for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm sure some people who would hear that might say, like, wow, that sounds really hard because, like, wow, those probably like really emotional conversations. And what if somebody gets hurt? But, like, the thing is, if you weren't having those conversations, somebody would still get hurt. They just maybe lie about it. You're not being open about it. It's not like the feelings aren't there. It's not like those desires aren't there. They're just not being communicated. They're not being brought into the light. They're being bottled up. They're being pushed down, and you're putting shame on top of them. So it's never wrong to talk about these things and to be open about these things. And can those conversations be difficult? Yeah. I mean, I think that you do grow in emotional maturity. You have to you really do have to level up to have some of those conversations, I think.
That's it. And they do get easier over time. They might be really challenging to start with, but you get better at them.
Yeah.
You get better at controlling your emotion coming into those conversations sometimes, I think. Yeah.
It's true. Because if you feel safe and you're not going to be judged and you trust that person, then there's that beautiful boundary around it to be able to have that. Yeah. Whether you're married or not married or whatever, as long as you've got that platform to spring from. So
yeah,
it's been an amazing journey.
Hey Brian, what would you say to anyone who might kind of feel stuck, maybe starting to begin questioning or deconstructing their faith?
I think to start with just accepting yourself right where you're at is really important to focus on that. Because I think sometimes when you say stuck, that implies that it's not okay to be right where you're at.
Sure.
And I think the idea of deconstructing means that I'm taking apart some of my old beliefs and maybe I'm going to replace them with new beliefs. But what if you don't really replace them with new beliefs, in the sense that you used to have certainty around a set of beliefs and you start to take those apart? but you might never have that same kind of certainty around a new set of beliefs. You know what I'm saying? Like you might never land somewhere in the way that you were planted in evangelicalism. Like you felt like you were going to be an evangelical forever. Now you're taking it apart. You might not land into some sort of thing that you're then going to be forever, right? And so we can feel like, oh, I'm stuck. I don't have the answers. I'm not figuring it out. But to first of all, just giving yourself permission to not know, to not have it figured out, to not have all the answers, and to fully just accept that that's where you're at. And that's okay because none of us actually know any of these things. Like these are the unknowable deep mysteries of the universe. And we only thought that we had to beat ourselves up over these questions because we were told that there was a big punishing guy at the end of it who was going to fucking smite us if we were wrong. So let that go and like just love yourself right where you're at. And then I like to ask, I think the questions that we should be asking in that process are not like, yeah, what do I really believe now? But like, what beliefs make me feel like a loving person? What beliefs make me feel like my best and fullest self? What beliefs make me come alive, make me feel engaged with other people, make me feel connected to the best parts of myself and to other people? What makes me bloom is what my friend Kevin Garcia's book is called, which I think is a really beautiful title. And those questions are more interesting to me now than, what's right. Because I don't know. I mean, yeah, to spend all that time arguing about things. None of us were at the empty tomb. We didn't get a look inside. Okay. We weren't there. I do. I can take things away from the teachings of Jesus without having to be positive and dogmatic about all the specifics. And so I think letting yourself not feel a sense of pressure to land somewhere. I have benefited from being a part of a spiritual community, but I don't know that that's for everybody. I think deciding on, there can be power and value in reclaiming some things for me. I have seen that. I have seen seeing that Christianity doesn't have to be this way, this harmful way. Like it can be co-opted very easily to be that way, but there can be beautiful, healthy Christian community. Seeing that has been healing for me. I don't know that that's going to be for everybody. And don't put pressure on yourself to get there. Certainly, I think going back to church can be like returning to the scene of the crime for some people. But for me, Jesus continues to be much bigger than evangelicalism or what I was a part of. So yeah, I think that it's worth exploring that in your journey if that might continue to be a part of it. But again, just seeing how it makes you feel even in your body,
Beautiful.
Amazing. Well, now,
a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, no, they're good. They're good.
No,
thoughts.
it's amazing. But people can find more of you, right? You're a writer. Tell us where people can find what you get up to.
My book doesn't come out until next year, in October, unfortunately. So it's a long ways off, which is a bummer. But I'll be talking about that more, maybe next summer. But I'm really excited about that. I wrote a book. I say wrote because I'm finalizing the manuscript now with my editor. It's in her hands, and we're kind of finishing just the final edits. But the book is called Hellbent, and it's the subtitle is How Belief in Hell Corrupts Christian Spirituality and How to Fix It. So basically, the big idea, some of the things that we've discussed today about how that hell, I call it a spirituality of hell, which is bigger than just a doctrine of hell, not just the belief that those bad things are going to happen to people, but it infects our spirituality. Having that punishing God at the focus of spirituality makes it impossible to love God, ourselves, and other people. So I talk about that in my own story, but then I also show how the way of Jesus leads us to a very different kind of spirituality of love and connection. And I unpack that through the ministry of Jesus. And then I ask some questions in the book, like for a lot of people, they want to know if there's no hell, why did Jesus even live? Why did Jesus even die? What did Jesus save us from? What does it even mean to be saved? What is it? Do you even have to be saved? Can you be another religion besides a Christian if there's no hell? And so I wrestle with some of those questions, not just again from my own experience, but also from the Bible. And actually, I think there's a lot more in there that is quite more universalist than we've been led to believe. So I'm excited to kind of unpack some of that. So that's my major writing project, but I do have a Substack as well, where every Thursday I've been releasing a post of some kind, mostly meditations through the life and ministry of Jesus, where again, I'm showing that Jesus was not pointing us to some exclusivistic, dogmatic thing that was meant to punish people. He was inviting us into a life of love and connection and showing us really what God's dream for the world was. So I believe Jesus' message is still really relevant, and I try to connect it to that. And so I've been having a lot of fun showing that, and that's been really healing just for me too. I love talking about Jesus still, because even after walking away from evangelicalism, I realized that the stuff that made me most excited about the way of Jesus, which I still I preached about, like I could stand behind a lot of the stuff I preached even while an evangelical pastor, but it was all within this framework of dogmatism and punishment. But when a lot of that fell away, I found out that the core of it, of love, that's what I saw in Jesus was still there, and it will probably always be there for me. And so I'm still talking about that. And so you can check out my Substack. You can subscribe, which would be awesome, because you know, if you subscribe to my Substack, I'm sure when next year rolls around, you'll get more updates on the book as well.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm a subscriber, and I love it.
Yeah,
and where is that?
Yeah, I am. I'm a subscriber, mate. I'm loving it. The Sermon on the Mount stuff was amazing. I love that the two sermons, and like I was like, what? That's right. They're actually quite different.
I might do Matthew's Sermon on the Mount this week, just to pull out some things from Matthew's, because I don't know, that's kind of fun for me too, is even showing how there's beauty in the diversity between the passages. I mean, there's a reason why we have 4 gospels, and early on in the church, there was some debate about, hey, should we just merge all these together and make one story and like kind of chop out the bits that don't fit and make it into one? And they're like, no, like even though there's contradictions and they don't really cleanly fit together, let them be 4. And I think there's like beauty in that. There's like the mystery right there. Like we don't have none of this. We weren't there, but we have these 4 accounts that gives us these different angles, these different perspectives.
I was like, dude, Jesus was on flat ground. I was like, maybe wasn't on a mount. That's right, cool.
So Luke has a sermon on the plain and Matthew has a sermon on the mount, and they're the same sermon, different. I'm glad that you're out for that, Bevan. I'm glad you're
I do. I love it, mate.
We'll have to go to your website for anyone that wants to read more about this, right?
Yeah. So where can we find you?
Substack is a like blog newsletter. I believe it's like brianrecker.substack.com.
We'll put it in the comments.
Put it in the notes.
Yeah,
and your Instagram, people can find all this through your Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, every Thursday I put in my stories, and I'll post. I've been posting like some memes to accompany every Substack post.
Yes, I love it.
And that's at Recker, BERECKER.
The E is my middle initial. That's for Eugene.
No.
Oh, Eugene. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, there's we could really talk forever, and we could unpack absolutely everything.
We could keep going.
This has been such a wonderful chat, and we can't wait to see more from you, Brian.
And we genuinely can say, Brian,
guys.
Yeah, we love you, mate. We genuinely can say we love you, mate. Thank you so much for who you are,
dude,
and continually struggling with the big questions.
If I'm ever in Australia, I'll have to hit you guys up.
Yeah,
please do.
We always say, just as we always say to our friends, if your children annoy you, just send them to Australia. We'll look after them. Awesome, mate.
Thank you, mate.
Bye.
This has been Out in the Open. You can find us at Out Open Pod on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. Out in the Open. It's Bevan and Matt here, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Bye.